independence, freedom, unity, what we value, our heart, the life of the Trinity, the life of Christ. So many of the things that we've been looking at for the past few weeks, they all converge as we come upon Independence Day. Welcome to this episode of Pearls of the Interior Life. Thank you for making this time for the Lord. Always good to be with you. First, before we get started, our mobile app is out now, and all of these things that we talk about, building up our interior life and how we then take that out into the world around us, is covered in the app through various retreats, guided meditations, daily gospel reflections, and so on. So there are links below if you've not subscribed to the app yet. Hope you will. Hope you'll give it a try and find that to be a blessing in helping you maintain a daily prayer life, growing closer to God each day. For today, we're coming on Independence Day. We want to look particularly at those themes of unity, independence, and freedom. They're all sort of interrelated. They all come together. So this is a good time, and it ties together many of the things we've been looking at over the past few weeks of the various feasts that we've had. So we're going to look at those, and in particular, as always, what does it mean for our interior life? Let's start with unity. In the past few weeks, we've had feasts dedicated to the Most Holy Trinity, to Christ and His Sacred Heart. The month of June is really focused on Christ, His heart, His incarnation. And again, this is telling us something about unity. Look at the Trinity. Three divine persons with one divine nature. They are always together, always working together, always one, as Christ tells us, and yet there are distinctions. God the Father with creation, the Son with redemption, the Spirit with our sanctification. Why? Well, that's why it's a mystery. We don't know exactly, except that is how God ordains it to be. And again, He's telling us something about unity and relationship in Himself. That is what the Trinity is pointing us to. And then always our question, we looked at this a few weeks ago, where do we fit into that? That's a question we should always be asking, because that's what we're invited into. Christ. Okay, now it flips. Instead of, in the Trinity, we have three persons with one nature. Now we have Christ, who is one person with two natures, a human nature and a divine nature. Again, He's showing us that unity. And the church struggled with this for centuries. Saint Cyril of Alexandria, his great on the unity of Christ, was really a pivotal aspect of this, of getting this straight. The Council of Ephesus really proclaiming what we understand about Christ, true God and true man. Just recently we had the gospel reading of Christ asleep in the boat during the storm at sea, and Origen, writing on this, shows how this shows the unity of Christ. Christ in His divinity ordained the storm. He called that down upon the sea. In His humanity, He falls asleep. He needed rest. He had just come off of a very draining time in His ministry. But they worked perfectly together, because in that storm, in taking His rest, He gave a very important message to the disciples. Why are you worrying? I'm not worrying. I'm God. I'm with you. Okay? Be at peace. Be at peace. Do not be afraid. The great enemy of faith. So there was Christ, two natures just working perfectly together to His desired end of drawing His disciples to Himself, His desired end always of drawing us to Him. So unity always implies relationship. E pluribus unum. Out of many come one. Now it seems to be going the other way around. Out of one comes many. But it's for ourselves as well. Our interior unity. We know how it's like when we're getting torn apart in all different directions. The popular term for that these days is cognitive dissonance. That's where so much stress comes from. It's not for nothing that our tagline for interior life is inner harmony, eternal happiness. When we get ourselves unified, harmonized, that's when we're on a path to God. That's when we're setting ourselves up for a life of great blessing in heaven. Unity. And God is sending us clear messages there. How about independence and freedom? This is where it gets very interesting. Independence and freedom are related but distinct. Independence is really very much related to whatever our circumstances are. It naturally falls out from them. In the United States, our founding fathers rightfully declared independence. They said, we're not dependent on England anymore. We can self-govern. We can defend ourselves. We can manage our own commerce and trade and so forth. We don't need England lording over us. We can be independent. But there are many other spheres in life in which dependency is quite natural. I'm dependent on clothing manufacturers to clothe my family. I'm dependent on farmers and distributors to feed my family, especially bacon manufacturers and donut bakers. Your needs may vary. We have this natural dependence. Now, there's also often an unnatural or a coerced dependence, and that's what our founding fathers were sensing with England. This is what you see with drug dealers who, they want the dependence of the people buying their narcotics. Frankly, we see this with the federal government, making people dependent on the government to perpetuate themselves. But now we can see the interplay of dependence, independence, and freedom. Let's take the case of a family unit. You have a child who's very dependent on the parents, and it's up to the parents to moderate that degree of freedom. To say, here's a 16-year-old boy, here are the keys to the liquor cabinet and dad's sports car. Probably not a great choice of allowing freedom there. It has to be done with great care. God gives us tremendous freedom because he expects us to be spiritual adults. Here's the key. With that freedom comes the responsibility for the consequences of how it is either used or misused. And now we start seeing that, again, that interplay of dependence and freedom. And here's where it all starts to come together. Do we use our freedom well? Now let's look at our relationship with God. The more unified we are, the better we use our freedom. The more unified we are in our interior, all of our faculties, with our passions, the more everything is going in the same direction, and the more that they are then unified with God, the more perfectly we will use our freedom. The more we're not, the more we're divided. That brings us, Satan, diabolos, diabolical, the divider. The more we're divided from God, the more we're divided in our interior, pulling us this way and that, we're not going to use our freedom very well. So too, as a society. And so too, in society here, it's good to reaffirm truths that are prized self-evident to people listening to this. But as a society, we used to be a Christian society. It's very much out of vogue to say that these days, but it's just a simple fact. Yes, there was that idea of respecting a plurality of faiths, and you can find those quotes from Jefferson and others. But when this society was founded, 95% of the people, to quote George Bailey, who did the living and the buying and the working and the dying in our country, were Christian. That was our unified values, and our founding fathers were too. Don't believe people say, oh, they were just deists. They didn't really believe that God cared about us or anything to do with us. He maybe started things in motion, but now we're all on our own. Yeah, functionally they were atheists. No, far from it. You've probably seen a lot of the different quotes. Benjamin Franklin, supposedly, the deist par excellence, at the Continental Congress, said, don't you remember we used to pray to our Father of Lights? That is why we were victorious in the Revolutionary War. So we were a Christian nation, and it was that shared unity with one another and with God that brought the measure of success we had. Yes, we did have, especially our original national sin of slavery and many other wars beside, because we were never perfectly unified with God, although even many of those issues are not as they're presented by the leftists that want to use it to completely dismantle our country. But the point being, to the extent that we thrived as a country was the extent that we were unified together in our unity with God. The more we move away from that, the more we're going to descend. And this is where unity always starts at the smallest level. It starts with us and God. This is why one other hot button issue, but again, it's good to speak truth, with the recent Dobbs ruling and the overturn of Roe v. Wade, why that is such a good thing. Because abortion has no place in our country, because it separates us from God. And there's no doubt about this, by the way, that every human life is a human life from conception desired by God. I mean, science certainly backs it up. Certainly scripture does. When you look at all the different verses that God knew us before the foundations of the world, that he had a plan for each of us. He knit us together in the womb, and so on. There is no doubt that each and every human life was desired by God, was planned by God, is God's life. And we're just given the great dignity and awesome responsibility of participating in that, of bringing in that life planned by God, of hopefully shepherding it through and to heaven. That's the key job of parents. And woe to us when we use our freedom to choose any differently. And that's why Dobbs is a good thing. It's just the beginning, as we all know. Mother Teresa, any nation that would kill its own children, what isn't it capable of? We need to get past abortion. But this just gets to the point that until we're unified in our values, and by the way, we should do another episode on this. Good luck getting any politician to actually state what their values are. They'll all say, our conservative values or shared values or whatever. Do they ever articulate what those values are? Good luck finding that. Yeah, at most they might just give some watery, well, we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, that individualism and hard work and so on. Yeah, okay. Yeah, maybe. That's, maybe 1% of it. What are the rest of our shared values? Until we start really unifying once again around God, it's going to be a rough road. Where does this bring us? What are our takeaways? Well, it's the same as it always was. It is that interior unity and our shared unity in God. We see this in recent scripture on the solemnities of St. Peter and Paul. We saw it when Peter, in Acts of the Apostles, when he was imprisoned by Herod. What was it that precipitated his miraculous release from prison? It said, all of the church was united in prayer. When we come together in prayer, wow, that's when mountains are moved. But when we come together in prayer from our own personal holiness, or it's the prayer of a righteous man or woman, that is the prayer that has power. So when we're united with Christ, and then when we bring that together, that is when suddenly you have a society that is healthy and that thrives and that glorifies God and lifts everybody up. And that old line from St. Francis, let there be peace on earth, let it begin with me. I used to, I don't know, I couldn't really connect with that, or it just seemed like one of those hallmark phrases. I recognize more and more how true that is. The peace, it does start with each of us individually. It's not so much what we do at the ballot box, it's what we do on our knees. One other aspect of freedom, it's not for nothing that Cardinal Sarah and Pope Benedict all refer to in different ways that dictatorship of noise. And this is where we need silence. It is in silence that we hear God and that we build up that unity and we separate ourselves. This is why the enemy has that constant noise, that constant open sewer of the media. And it is when we say no to that and get on our knees that there we start finding our unity with God. There we find our freedom. Freedom from what? Christ, I came to set captives free. From what? From sin. For what? For God. There is our freedom. Then we're doing the best things that we can. Then we can come together within our families. We can come together in our church. We can come together in our communities. We can come together in our society. Because then we've done the best things that we can when we're bringing ourselves piece by piece, bit by bit, closer to God. Then we turn it over to God. Then it's up to him. And, at different points in time, in different places, different peoples, God sometimes lets the society go where it will. It's his choice what happens. It's the United States. But individually, we make our choice to recognize our complete dependence on God. In that, we find tremendous freedom. So wishing you a wonderful Independence Day, and I look forward to being with you again.